You feel your phone buzz, and you already know it's them, another demand disguised as just checking in. You remember every time you were the loyal one, the forgiving one, the rational one, and somehow you were still the one who got blamed. You watch louder, less competent people get rewarded for chaos, while your calm intelligence gets harvested like a free resource. You sit in a room full of friends and feel lonelier than you do when you're actually alone. You've started to disappear quietly, and a part of you is terrified, because a bigger part of you feels relief. There are 7 stages a man goes through when he cuts everyone off. By stage 5, he becomes completely unrecognizable to the people who used to manipulate him. If you've recently pulled away from friends, family, or your old life, this will explain exactly what is happening to you. Society will tell you that you are depressed or antisocial. That is a lie designed to pull you back into the matrix of people-pleasing. In the next 20 minutes, using the profound psychology of Carl Jung, we will reveal why your isolation is actually the birth of an untouchable mind. Stay and discover who you are truly becoming. Here's the societal con. You were trained to treat social proof like oxygen. You were trained to treat being liked as morality. You were trained to confuse popularity with safety. And the system loves that training, because a man who needs approval is a man who can be steered. That's why the moment you begin the psychology of cutting people off, people panic. Not because you're wrong, because you're exiting the marketplace where your attention is traded. Did you know that periods of extreme isolation are biologically identical to the neurological pruning that occurs during major evolutionary leaps in the brain? Your mind doesn't fall apart in solitude. Your mind reorganizes, your mind deletes noise, your mind sharpens the blade, and you're about to learn the forbidden answer you've been circling for years. What is the exact psychological milestone that occurs in the brain when a man permanently deletes the number of his longest, most toxic friend? You think it's just deleting a contact. It isn't. It's a ritual of identity. It's the moment your nervous system stops expecting a reward from the same hand that kept slapping you. Here is a dark truth. Your isolation isn't a symptom of trauma. The people you left behind were the trauma. Stop diagnosing yourself with loneliness. Start recognizing it as a filtration system. In this video, I'm going to give you 7 signs you are becoming untouchable through Carl Jung's shadow work, dark psychology, and the real psychology of cutting people off. You will understand why men withdraw, what your guilt is really made of, and how emotional control turns silence into social dominance without you begging, explaining, or chasing. And before we finish, there is one critical boundary you must never lower once you've cut them off. Pay close attention. If these ideas resonate with you, hit that subscribe button for more top-tier content. Also, drop a "let them" in the comments so I know you're ready. Let's dive in. Sign number 1. You stop calling it loneliness and you start calling it space. You didn't wake up one day and decide to become cold. You woke up one day and realized warmth was being taxed. Every conversation had a hidden invoice. Every hangout had a price. Every friendship had a subtle demand. Be smaller, be softer, be available, be useful. You finally saw the pattern. You gave patience to people who gave you pressure. You gave empathy to people who gave you entitlement. You gave clarity to people who fed on confusion. And the moment you pull back, they don't ask, "Are you okay?" They ask, "Why are you acting like this?" Because your withdrawal threatens their access. This is where Carl Jung's shadow work begins, not in a candle-lit self-help fantasy, but in the brutal moment you admit you have a shadow and your shadow is tired of paying. Your shadow is the part of you that says no. Your shadow is the part of you that doesn't smile on command. Your shadow is the part of you that refuses to be harvested. And yes, this is dark psychology, but not the cheap kind. This is the real kind. The psychology that explains why a man with boundaries terrifies people who live by taking. Pattern interrupt. What if the guilt you feel for cutting them off was literally implanted in you by them to ensure you never left? Because it was. They trained you with micro-punishments. They used sarcasm, exclusion, passive aggression, jokes, and selective warmth. They rewarded you when you were compliant. They withdrew when you were sovereign. That's not friendship. That's conditioning. And the first sign you are becoming untouchable is simple. You stop negotiating with conditioning. You step out of it. But feeling the urge to leave is just the first step. Wait until you hear sign number 2, the eradication of guilt, coming up next. Now, answer the forbidden question, the exact psychological milestone. It happens at the moment you make the boundary irreversible, when you permanently delete the number of your longest, most toxic friend. You are not deleting data. You are deleting a pathway your brain kept walking down out of habit and hope. You are ending intermittent reinforcement, the most addictive social trap on earth. Sometimes they reward you, sometimes they humiliate you, and your mind keeps returning because the reward is unpredictable. That unpredictability hooks you. It creates anticipation, it creates scanning, it creates that sick little need to check your phone. The milestone is this: your brain stops treating their approval as a future reward worth pursuing. Your prefrontal cortex, your strategic mind, finally overrides the limbic loop that kept you chasing relief. You close the open loop. You end the fantasy that this time it will be different. You stop feeding the inner prosecutor that says, maybe it's your fault. You make it final. And the second it becomes final, your emotional control rises, not because you feel nothing, but because you finally stop bargaining with the poison. You don't just cut them off, you cut off the version of you that needed them. This is why men withdraw, not because they're weak, because they're done. Sign number 2, your guilt dies, and something colder takes its place: accuracy. You used to feel guilty for not replying fast enough. You used to feel guilty for missing the event. You used to feel guilty for protecting your time. Read that again. You felt guilty for protecting your time. That's how deep the programming goes. The world teaches you that access to you is a human right. Your family, your friends, your old group chats, your old circles, they act like your attention is public property. But you are not public property. Pattern interrupt. Jung warned that society hates the solitary man because he acts as a mirror to their own profound emptiness. When you step back, you force them to sit with themselves, and they can't. So they label you, they diagnose you, they gossip. They call you cold, different, arrogant, depressed. They need a story where you're broken, because if you're not broken, then they were the problem. And here is the dark truth you're allowed to finally say out loud: you didn't lose your friends. You outgrew your parasites. This is where the psychology of cutting people off becomes a weapon, because the first barrier to freedom isn't distance, it's guilt. Guilt is not morality. Guilt is a leash. And the moment you begin real manipulation defense, you see guilt for what it is, the emotion that keeps you returning to people who do not deserve you. Ask yourself, how many times did you apologize just to end the tension? How many times did you be the bigger person while they became the smaller soul? How many times did you lower your standards to keep peace with someone who enjoyed your discomfort? Sign number 2 is when you stop performing forgiveness as a currency. You don't hate them, you don't obsess, you don't plot revenge. You do something far more violent to their control. You become indifferent, and indifference is a form of emotional control that most people never master. Pattern interrupt. Stop diagnosing yourself with loneliness. Start recognizing it as a filtration system. You are not being punished by solitude. You are being purified by it. And if you're thinking, but what if I'm wrong? What if I'm the problem? Good. That question means you're intelligent. But watch what happens next, because sign number 3 is where intelligence turns into a predator's radar. Later we will dissect the hyper-calibrated radar, why you can suddenly spot a liar in 3 seconds. Sign number 3. You start seeing manipulation the way you used to see social vibes. You used to walk into rooms and scan for approval. Now you walk into rooms and scan for motives. And it's not paranoia, it's pattern recognition. This is dark psychology in its cleanest form. You stop interpreting words. You start interpreting incentives. You stop asking, do they like me? You start asking, what do they want from me? You notice who only calls when they need something. You notice who gets uncomfortable when you succeed. You notice who wants you to stay humble because your confidence threatens their position. You notice who uses jokes to test disrespect. You notice who disappears when you stop initiating. And this is why men withdraw. Men withdraw when they realize they've been socially overextended, over-giving to the wrong people, over-explaining to the wrong ears, over-sharing with the wrong hands. Pattern interrupt. Here is a dark truth. Your isolation isn't a symptom of trauma. The people you left behind were the trauma. When you remove the trauma, your nervous system stops bracing, your mind gets quiet. And in that quiet, you hear everything you used to miss. You hear the contradiction in their compliments. You hear the demand inside their concern. You hear the control inside their advice. This is Carl Jung shadow work in real time. Because your shadow is the part of you that always sensed the truth, but you suppressed it to be nice. You were taught that suspicion is negative. You were taught that boundaries are selfish. You were taught that saying no is rude, that teaching was not designed to make you good, it was designed to make you manageable. So here is the strategic reframing. Your isolation is not a social failure. Your isolation is a calibration chamber. You're becoming the kind of man who can't be seduced by surface-level warmth. You can't be bribed by validation. You can't be pressured by groupthink. This is manipulation defense. And it gets sharper. Because sign number 4 is when your inner world becomes so stabilized that other people lose the ability to emotionally hijack you. I'm going to reveal the exact psychological shift that turns your Friday night loneliness into pure, weaponized power. Sign number 4. Your emotions stop being public. This is where you begin to look different to people who used to read you like an open book. You used to react fast. You used to explain fast. You used to defend fast. Now you pause. Now you breathe. Now you watch them try to pull a reaction out of you like a slot machine that used to pay out, and you don't pay out anymore. Pattern interrupt. Did you know that periods of extreme isolation are biologically identical to the neurological pruning that occurs during major evolutionary leaps in the brain? This is the pruning. You stop wasting emotional energy on people who convert it into leverage. Because emotional control is not being calm. Emotional control is choosing where your emotional investment goes and where it doesn't. This is the moment your isolation turns into dominance. You start to understand the power dynamics you used to ignore. When you react, you give them information. When you explain, you give them angles. When you justify, you give them a rope. You stop arguing with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop negotiating with people who benefit from your confusion. You stop trying to be fair with people who never played fair. And here's the paradox that makes you untouchable. Your disengagement is your most powerful engagement. You don't need to win every conversation. You need to stop entering rigged conversations. This is why men withdraw, because they finally see the rigging. Now listen carefully, because this is where most intelligent men make a fatal mistake. They cut people off physically, but they keep them alive mentally. They replay conversations. They imagine comebacks. They fantasize about finally being understood. That mental replay is the last chain. And sign number 5 is the bolt cutter. You might be tempted to explain to them why you left, but do not make the fatal mistake I outline in sign number 5. Sign number 5, you stop giving closure to people who used you. This is the moment you become unrecognizable, because the old you believed in being understood. The new you believes in being free. You realize closure is often a trap. You realize explanations are often invitations for debate. You realize your reasons will be used as weapons. So you stop volunteering your inner world to your enemies. And yes, if that word makes you uncomfortable, good, because you've been calling enemies friends for too long. In dark psychology, the person who demands an explanation is usually the person who feels entitled to you. They don't want understanding. They want access. Pattern interrupt. What if the guilt you feel for cutting them off was literally implanted in you by them to ensure you never left? So you do the most powerful thing a man can do in a world addicted to noise. You go silent. Not passive-aggressive silence, not punishment silence, strategic silence. Strategic silence is manipulation defense. Strategic silence says, you don't get to rent space in my mind. Strategic silence says, you don't get a courtroom in my chest. Strategic silence says, you don't get an audience for your performance. And notice what happens when you implement this silence. They escalate. They send bait messages, you okay? They send guilt hooks, after everything I've done. They send curiosity traps, we need to talk. They send social proof threats. Everyone thinks you're acting weird. That's the Cialdini principle of liking and social proof being used against you. It's a herd tactic. It's a control tactic. It's a fear tactic. And you reject it, because you are not building a life optimized for being liked. You are building a life optimized for power, peace, and precision. This is where Carl Jung's shadow work becomes visible. You stop trying to look good to people who are committed to seeing you as useful. You choose the shadow trait you were trained to fear, extreme independence. And when you claim it, you become dangerous to anyone who survives by emotional leverage. If you possess this next sign, you have successfully integrated your shadow and terrified your abusers. Sign number 6. Toxic people start avoiding you without you doing anything. This is the magnetic repulsion, and it confuses you at first because you expect confrontation, you expect drama, you expect the big blow-up scene. But what often happens is quieter and colder. They sense you won't respond the old way. They sense you won't over-explain. They sense you won't bend. They sense you won't chase. They sense you won't beg to be included. So they back away. Not because they respect you as a human being, sometimes they never will, but because they respect a force they can't move. This is power dynamics at the nervous system level. Your posture changes, your pacing changes, your eye contact changes, your willingness to be pulled into nonsense changes. And people who feed on emotional chaos can't feed on you anymore. Pattern interrupt. Here is a dark truth. Your isolation isn't a symptom of trauma. The people you left behind were the trauma. You start recognizing that some people don't actually want connection. They want consumption. They want your time. They want your contacts. They want your resources. They want your emotional labor. They want your intelligence to solve their life while they keep sabotaging yours. So your system does what a healthy system does. It rejects the pathogen. This is why men withdraw. And this is the part nobody tells you. When you become untouchable, your circle doesn't just get smaller, your circle gets expensive, because the price of entry becomes character. Now, before we finish, There is one critical boundary you must never lower once you've cut them off. Never reopen the door just to see. Never do the one last call. Never do the quick catch-up. Never do the "I'm over it now." Never do the "maybe they changed." Because the most toxic relationships don't survive on love or hate. They survive on access, and if you restore access, you reset the entire control pattern. Pattern interrupt. You didn't lose your friends. You outgrew your parasites. This brings us to sign number 7. The sovereign rebirth, how you know the transformation is complete. And that final sign is where your isolation becomes an empire. How do you know the transformation is complete? That is the final sign, the sovereign rebirth. You started this video wondering if your desire to cut everyone off made you a bad person. You are leaving knowing it makes you an awakened, untouchable strategist. Sign number 7. You stop seeking witnesses. This is the sovereign rebirth. You don't need them to understand. You don't need them to approve. You don't need them to validate your pain. You don't need them to admit what they did. You don't even need them to apologize. Because the moment you needed their recognition, they still owned a piece of you. This is the ultimate psychological milestone. You become self-validating. Your nervous system stops scanning the outside world for permission to exist. Your attention returns to you. And attention is not a soft concept. Attention is a strategic resource. Attention is life force. Attention is where your power goes. This is the end of the psychology of cutting people off as a phase, and the beginning of it as a permanent operating system. This is emotional control at its highest level. You can be alone without collapsing into storylines. You can be misunderstood without rushing to correct it. You can be disliked without bargaining for entry back into the herd. That is why men withdraw, not because they are broken, because they are done being shaped. Now listen, your anger was never the problem. Your anger was the signal. Your anger was your psyche screaming, "You are being used." Your anger was your shadow pounding on the inside of your ribs, demanding integration, and you have integrated it. You have turned resentment into clarity. You have turned betrayal into filtration. You have turned isolation into selection. You have turned silence into leverage. You have turned detachment into social dominance. This is Carl Jung shadow work, not as theory but as armor. And yes, this is dark psychology, but used as manipulation defense, not as cruelty. You are not here to destroy people. You are here to become ungovernable by them. So here's your final challenge. Never apologize for outgrowing the room. Let them assume whatever they want while you build your empire in the quiet. Drop "dark sovereign" in the comments. And if you are ready to wield your shadow and master the art of strategic isolation, subscribe. This is an elite alliance of independent minds. Men who refuse to be emotionally exploited, men who study power dynamics, men who build internal empires while the world begs for their reaction. Want to know Machiavelli's exact rules for weaponizing your silence against those who disrespect you? Click the video on your screen now, and whatever you do, don't stop now. The on-screen video matters more than you think. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. I'll see you there. See what others miss, know what others fear, become who others can't.